to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from Taiwan. I'm Wenchi Yu. With Trump's victory, Europe ponders a new world order. Trump's campaign rhetoric of a U.S. retreat from European defense, particularly the U.S. support for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, has created anxiety and cast doubts over Europe's security future. In addition, Trump's pledge to raise tariffs on all imports, including those from Europe, also raised concern over Europe's trade relationship with the US, given the region's sluggish economic performance. Within Europe, there are also diverse views regarding future transatlantic relationship and Europe-Asia, in particular Europe-China relationship. How does Taiwan factor into all these changing dynamics? Today, to further discuss this, I speak to Simona Grano, Director of the Taiwan Studies Project at the University of Zurich and Senior Fellow on Taiwan at Asia Society's Center for China Analysis. So, Simona, what is Europe's view of the New World Order under Trump 2.0?
Well, I think that Europe fears that its former expectations of security guarantees provided through NATO and the United States could come to an abrupt end under Trump if he, for example, decides to leave Ukraine to its own devices, and that could possibly mean a more chaotic global order. I think in terms of foreign policy, Trump is likely to push for more involvement by European countries themselves in European security, especially in the areas of defense spending and the war in Ukraine. And even though I think it's unlikely that the US would, under Trump, withdraw from NATO, Trump's rhetoric, could significantly undermine NATO's deterrence posture and put more pressure on member states to invest more. So, in short, I would say that I think that Europe fears that Trump's victory could mean a more transactional, sort of pay to play foreign policy that could really prove to be very costly for smaller economies.
And so, what does that mean, though, for Europe's relationship with China? Do you think you will see more sort of diversification in terms of European countries wanted to, uh, actually have a stronger relationship with China just to balance it out?
Mm. Well, I think it's difficult to say because, I mean, as you know, Europe does not speak in one voice, and you have different countries in Europe with different attitudes towards China and the US, also according to their trade interests. I think that, if Trump would should he pursue his trade war with both China and the EU at the same time, then some EU members at that point may seek closer ties to Beijing. But if Trump does in the future recognize that confronting both the EU and China at the same time would not actually help to make America healthy or great again, then the EU could actually side closer to the US, and this could also marginalize certain pro China voices in Europe, like Viktor Orban and Hungary. And I think in general, we can say that with the security threat posed by Russia in Europe, European countries will likely put and continue to put more of an effort in maintaining their close alliances to the US rather than trying to adjust the bloc's foreign policy approach towards China. And especially you can see that in the European Commission, where security issues really have taken a driving seat.
So, on that point, right, it's also interesting that Trump seems to have a better relationship with Putin than most other Western world leaders. And so, if the US moves closer to Russia, what does that mean, though? Would that actually make Europe feel more uncomfortable, or do they feel it would be more secure for them?
Well, I think if Trump decides to move closer to countries that are authoritarian and provoking problems in Europe, like Russia, that would make Europe feel very much uncomfortable. The positive consequence of that could be that Europe would really start actually placing more emphasis on its own defense, which so far has not been taking place. But I think that that would create even more of a gap between, in these transatlantic alliances, which in the past few years between the US and Europe has actually served quite well in actually creating a bridge that has put China under strain.
Right. So that's all really interesting. And is there sort of more diverse views within Europe? Because we know France seem to take a different approach. Obviously, Hungary is, a totally different side. And then you have Germany, you have the UK. How do they coordinate or not when it comes to European foreign policy?
Well, I think that's the key challenge, right, in the future to come. I mean, as you said, Germany, for example, has deep economic ties to China, and that makes it very difficult that something will actually, change in the fact. And also, Germany has had a few problems lately with this government coalition. There are very potent lobbies that actually are, for better relationship or rebuilding them with China. The UK has just had another change in government, and we have seen, of course, Keir Starmer trying to be at least trying to rekindle relationship with China, despite what is going on in Hong Kong with Jimmy Lai. And then you have other countries like Lithuania, which have had a very pro-Taiwan approach in the past few years, but
And
now the
Czech
government.
Republic as well. Yes.
Exactly. And now the government has changed. So to go back to your question, I think that it's not really even that easy to say this country behaves in this way. Of course, if you have enmeshed trade relations, that will provoke more problems in decoupling or de-risking from China. But I think very often it also really depends on which coalition or which government is in place at a certain specific moment in a country.
Yeah. And what does that mean for Taiwan, given all the upcoming changes?
Well, I think that, Europe Taiwan interactions will have much room to grow in the coming years within the limits that Europe has self imposed out of fear of a possible Chinese response or retaliation. I think that the areas that look more promising are people to people exchanges, talent development, but also, of course, digital industries, because Europe has an interest in fostering that and Taiwan has know how. I think that the recent spike in Taiwanese foreign investments in Europe, direct investments, is also a very positive development that will continue to take place.
Can
And
you
that,
say more about that when you say there's a spike in Taiwan's foreign investment into
well,
Europe?
you see, of course, that, for example, in the semiconductor field, Taiwan is investing in Dresden, building a facility in Germany. But just last week or in these days, actually, Lin Jialong, the minister but from Taiwan, has actually traveled to, I think, Belgium, Poland, and Lithuania. And they are trying to foster more alliances in some specific sectors to, for example, drone and security. That's also an interest that Taiwan has. So I think we will see a continued attempt by Taiwan itself to try to actually foster better ties to Europe, also potentially because of the risk or uncertainty that is coming out of the US with Trump's election. Yeah.
And so, have you noticed how China is approaching all these relationships differently?
Well, I think, China will continue to do what it has done in the past few years. It will definitely adopt a divide and conquer strategy in the hope that if Trump retreats from some of the alliances and organizations and adopt a more sort of inward-looking approach, China could fill the vacuum and sort of rebuild a better alliances or relationship with European countries, which has come under strain in the past few years. And of course, Europe is a very important trade partner for China. I think that China will continue to try to further divide the transatlantic alliance, as I said, between the US and Europe, arguing probably that Europeans cannot rely only on the US or that they should seek strategic autonomy. I think we will see in the coming months a conscious strategy by China that is likely to reach out to European capitals, to leaders visiting their countries, trying to ease the business environment for European companies in China, and even consider investing more in Europe. They have done that in the past. And I think that Beijing is also signaling that it is actually willing to work with Europe to implement the Paris Climate Agreement. However, if you ask me whether I think that will, actually succeed or not, China's strategy towards Europe, I would actually say no, mostly out of two reasons. First of all, one reason that has to do with trade. I think that Europe has become much more protectionist of its own market and fears Chinese overcapacity and also unfair practices. And it has signaled that also with the tariffs on electric vehicles. And I also think that in terms of geopolitics and security matters, Europe is finally waking up to the fact that the war in Europe, in Ukraine, has been sustained for so long with China's direct help to Russia. And so I would say there are both trade and security concerns that will hamper Europe's relationship going forward with China.
But what if economic growth is a serious challenge for Europe, which it seems to be the case now? And if Europe, will have a difficult relationship with the U.S. in terms of trade and economic relationship, then it really doesn't have that much, alternative option. Do you think that will change the outlook?
Well, I do think, as I said before, that if Trump really pursues a trade war with both Europe and China, then we have the risk that some European countries may actually cozy up to Beijing. That being said, I think that the former relationship that the European Union had with China, especially as a bloc, is long gone. I think that security concerns that we see in Europe every day, and there are everyday reports coming out of Chinese espionage in universities, in companies, in political parties. All of these concerns really weigh down or trickle down to the trade concerns, and they simply were not here just 5 years ago. I think Europe was really the one place where China could pursue trade relationship, void of the geopolitical tensions that you already had in the relationship between China and the US. That has changed in the past 5 years, also because of the war in Ukraine and the fact that and many European capitals seem to sort of implement this equation between authoritarian regimes. So Putin, of course, being supported by China, does not really play in China's favor.
If the war ends tomorrow, the Ukraine-Russia war ends tomorrow, how will that change all what we just discussed?
That's difficult to say. I think if the war will end, that would be a big relief, of course, for European capitals, and also much less pressure, especially economically speaking, in sustaining potentially Ukraine without the United States' help. That being said, in terms of geopolitics and the kind of relationship that Europe at the moment has with China, I don't think it would change much, especially because concerns related to Taiwan, which also were not that present in European capitals in the past, are now weighing heavily on the relationship between Europe and China, because we now know that Taiwan, of course, is the one place where 92% of the most advanced semiconductors come out of. And we all know how important also for the global trade the island is. So I think even if the war ends, in terms of geopolitical consideration and security shifts architecture, not much would change for Europe.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. Well, with that, we want to thank you and hope to have you back in a few months when we have a better idea of what the Trump administration is doing in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This has been a special episode of Zoom In, Zoom Out. For more stories from TaiwanPlus News, follow us on social media. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
经历过人生的话，你发现说，我们大部分都是爱美的。
我自己少遇见一朵花，我可能就不是这个样子。
开始思考什么叫做一个本土性，
大声的唱出来说我是台湾人。
In the face of adversity, the power of truth.
A roadmap for a just and open world, charted by the freest country in Asia.
Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
TaiwanPlus News, a voice of freedom in Asia.